Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I just cleared Anomaly Arbitration day 1 of full 3-star the Knights with like less than 8 cost on every single one of my teams. And I also managed to clear the King stage with some very interesting team comps that I'm probably going to show you in this video while I yap about all of the Knight and King stages. But anyway, this video is just me yapping about all of the stages and how difficult they are and how I feel like there's some sort of balancing shift with this Anomaly Arbitration because of how unique it is, and I'm pretty excited to talk about it with you guys. So yeah, let's get on to the video. I started from the easiest to the hardest, but I think this Anom is so unique for not having a single stage that I can say is generally easy for an account to clear. Which means that if you're finding this Anom difficult, you're not alone in that. I think this is the hardest Anom arbitration because of the Knight stages itself. I'll get into more of that in my overall thoughts, but let's get into the individual stages first in numerical order. We have the Knight 1, which is the Ascended, the Danshu, as the devs like to forget was an actual minor antagonist, and this new horsefish thing. It's not exactly like a seahorse, but it's close, I guess. And the debuff is the same from the first Anomaly Arbitration Knight 3 stage, which gives a max HP drain tick based on how many enemies you hit. And with these two, you're gonna see that it is very important that you respect this debuff. The Ascended is an old boss that lowers your recoverable HP. Nothing else really to talk about, it's pretty simple. But this horsefish is completely different. It has this stacking mechanic. It increases by 1 when you do like a basic, skill, ultimate, or memo sprite attack, and once you reach 4 stacks on the horse, it will advance itself and then clear all the charges. And depending on what phase the boss is in, it can do very nasty or very good things to you. I really don't want to make like a full breakdown of this boss because it actually is quite complicated, but the basic idea is that the more buttons you press and the more memo sprites you have equals good, unga bunga brain, whatever. This is one of those bosses that's more complicated to play if you aren't playing the exact team it's asking for, which is memo sprite teams, and the sustain check of this boss thanks to that blessing, and because of this enemy lineup it actually hits pretty hard. It forces you into a corner of not running sustainless to deal with its high amount of max HP. But if you are able to change your gameplay around to the deficiencies of your team, like for example if you're running a weaker sustain, you can time breaks and you can even maximize your blade or Jingliu damage by, proccing the stack enough times with careful play, then you should be fine on this stage because it's only 4 million HP for the fish boss, is what I would say if there wasn't actually 8 million HP. For reference, the MOC version of this boss has only 2 million HP per big fish. This is twice that amount of HP, and there's 2 of them. This is such a high amount of HP that if you don't have the fast memo sprites like Hyacinth, Aglaya, and Evernight to trigger its self HP drain mechanics, this can get really rough. So the damage check is high, even with all of the HP loss mechanics. It's not like, Nikador where there's fake HP and you can get away with less powerful party members just because they hit a lot, because, the reward of it is good enough. No, the options that are actually good for this fight are broken characters that don't need the shilling in the first place, and weaker characters would be strung up on a tree because of how high the HP is. Is it worse than the original DOT stage Anomaly Arbitration? Well, probably not, because memo sprites are more common in this meta, but if you didn't pull for any memo sprite characters or premium memo sprite characters, then you're in for a doozy with this Knight stage. The best characters are gonna be obviously Aglaya, Evernight, Hyacinth, Castris, Cyrene, and the non-memo sprite options are Phynon, Anaxa, DOT with High Sealance, the Firefly, Blade, and Jingliu. Do note that anyone that isn't a memo sprite character that I mentioned is not an easy win. They can clear with like a reasonable amount of minimal investment, like maybe 7 cost or so. But for Firefly specifically, one of the stages really wants her because it's a super break shill, so she might not be free to do this Knight 1 even though she's really good for it. And even someone like E0 Aglaya, who has the best matchup against it, can really struggle because RMC is in a fight of their life trying to justify their existence over Harmony MC for Knight 2. You're gonna notice that in these stages that even though someone can be really useful for a stage, there's a different Knight stage that is equally as difficult and you can't afford losing them there because they're a premium option. Again, you can't like BS with an old low investment DPS like Acheron E0 that you were able to do so in other Anom stages. You need to have like 3 teams with a similar amount of minimal strength to be able to deal with this stage. Overall, this stage is not the hardest stage in Anom history, given that Memo Sprite options are just really good and are in the meta. Most people probably have an answer for this stage, but the amount of HP bloat, it doesn't feel good at all. And the boss mechanic isn't rewarding enough for you to want to play like, Moza or something because of the attack count. No, it's actually very specific. There's no single 4-star remembrance character. The only one that would be considered as such is the main character, and you probably want to use HMC on this Anomaly Arbitration. So yeah, it's not easy. Don't feel bad that you can't clear the stage. Knight 2 is the Super Break Shill with the Nightmare Blunt rotation of these two horses, and on the second wave you have the Swarm. I don't think I need to go through the enemy mechanics. We've talked a lot about these bosses a lot in this channel. Their HP is thankfully lower than Knight 1, but it's offset by the same debuff from the first Anom, which shuts down crit damage. But just like the first Anom Arbitration, you can brute force through it by pumping yourself with so much crit damage that you can push through it. There's really not that much of a difference from the DOT stage from the first Anom Knight stage with this one. I would say this is a bit easier than the original DOT stage, but the HP is still tuned to the standards of Sustainless Break with Dahlia, and that's kind of the difficulty of this fight. Even though Sustainless Break is not the best archetype in the world, in a scenario like this where they are not being stopped mechanically, the amount of HP this boss has that matches Dahlia's damage increase is really annoying. This isn't like the break stage from the first Anom Arbitration, where it's tuned to break numbers pre-Dahlia. No, this is a stage where the HP just kind of assumes that you're using Dahlia. If you are going through this without Dahlia, even if you're using a Super Break DPS, you will be struggling because that archetype is way too ancient. Just like in Knight 1, where you really feel it being rough for not having Memo Sprites, not having Dahlia for Knight 2 is equally as punishing. The best characters for this fight are actually almost the exact same as Knight 1's best characters, and because of that, the challenge becomes how much can you sacrifice with premium options on Knight 1 so that Knight 2 can clear and vice versa. If you're a new account that missed the Super Break meta, your options are much more limited in both stages. And even if you caught the Super Break meta, you still need to pull Dahlia to make it work. Overall, I think this stage encapsulates Break a lot. It's not the best archetype, but it's strong enough to be meta relevant. In this case, this stage is not the hardest Knight stage, but it's strong enough to make you struggle clearing it. And just like Break, if you don't have Dahlia, you might as well use something else. Lastly, we have Knight 3 featuring Unk. Why did I say that? I have no idea what compelled me to say that this boss is Unk. It's one of the first bosses in the game, whatever. The joke doesn't land. And the gorilla from Penacony that hurts itself when using shield. Sorry, I'm so distracted with what I said. And on the second wave, it's the shield chilling boss. So, we know how this boss plays. Just have a shield and it will drain its own toughness. The boss mechanics themselves are actually not that interesting. If you bring a shield, their HP is pretty manageable. But the blessing combination is, yeah. The first blessing grants an advance after 6 attacks like the PF style Anom, while the second blessing delays allies when they're hit. You can do some basic math in your head and probably reach to the conclusion that this stage looks annoying as hell. But the main difficulty of this boss isn't so much that the HP is high like the other knights, but knowing when to do damage. The wave 1 does nothing special, but wave 2 is technically really interesting. The boss takes no damage when it's not broken. We all know that, right? But when this boss isn't broken, it drains its own toughness. And when it is broken, it takes a lot of damage. So let's give an example of teams that works well with this blessing matchup for in different ways, right? So first we have an Anoxa type character. Anoxa is a straightforward way of doing this mechanic, especially with Ceredra, because the boss takes so much damage and its HP isn't really that high. Anoxa's game plan to brute force through this is to stare at the boss draining its own toughness, and once it's broken, he snaps into one-shotting it. But it's not as simple for a character like Anoxa. The main danger for an Anoxa type character like this is that he might trigger the advanced blessing too early and the enemy goes back into being unbroken, which takes 0 damage. With the amount of attacks Anoxa has, especially with Ceredra, this is a real danger and it actually bricked one of my runs. You can turn this into an advantage though with a DPS like Archer or even Fei Xiao. Archer and Fei Xiao have a lot of control controlled attacks in their teams that they can trigger shield breaks earlier. And because Archer has a flexible damage window, he is able to control the blessing to go fast or slow to his benefit. Similar with Fei Xiao, who can hold her ults and unleash them when the enemy is broken while forcing the mechanic with a million follow-ups. Similarly with Phainon, he can force the mechanic and slam the meteor to one-shot. He's also immune to action delay, just like the last stage that this blessing showed up, the Hule stage. And you can also use the DOT archetype, which has Kafka. Kafka just has a lot of attacks, and if you combine that with Windset, she makes the toughness go away really quickly because she fulfills the mechanic. Kafka also has decent burst damage with her ultimate, and if you pair that with High Sealants, you should be able to do enough damage before the enemy advances itself. Compared to Night 1, the HP of this boss is much lower, but you're punished a lot more for failing the mechanic, which is better than bloated HP in my opinion. And you can go sustainless if you want to, but because this is a shield shill and a permanent Sword Array is free, and generally the best DPSs for this fight also have PT as a best in slot, just put the PT in the bag and just use them. Overall, Night 3 is probably the easiest, quote unquote, but from what I've seen, and I'd be glad to be proven wrong on this, is that it is still tanky enough that the options are still limited. Fei Xiao has a favorable mechanic, but even she can trip just before the finish line without enough investment. Same with Acheron. It's more of a threshold of front-loaded damage, and I don't think my DOT team could have cleared this without E1 High Sealants. And for Anaxa and Phainon, their front-loaded damage gets shot down without Cerebro, which is the entire point of this fight. So you can't necessarily put your weakest characters here. In fact, it's telling that what I consider the weakest character here is goddamn Fei Xiao and Acheron instead of Yun Li, which just tells everything about this fight. You still really do need the specific damage dealers that have a lot of front-loaded damage and controlled attacks. Otherwise, it feels pretty bad to run this boss. Now we have the King Stage, aka you've suffered through the Knights, now to get your freebie. The King Stage is straight up easier than any of the Knights. I don't think anyone is actually going to disagree with that, whoever has played the stage. I've had more issues running Aglaya on Night 1 than the King Stage that has an energy debuff. You know something is wrong if that's the case. I also have E0 Aglaya, by the way, this is crazy. The blessings this time around are weaker than the second Anomaly Arbitration, but the boss is also a lot squishier. For reference, the Sunday boss has 30 million HP, with 2 phases consistently having 5 shared HP bars, and the previous King Stage Aquila has 58 million HP with sometimes shared HP. And unlike Aquila, this stage gives you shields through its break mechanics on frame 1, so you don't even have to wait for 2 phases like Aquila to get your sustainless run home free. You don't even need break characters actually specifically. You just need to match weakness types, which the blessing can give you for free. You can consistently ditch a sustain and feel good about it. So the DPS check is not just lower because the HP is literally halved from last time, but because breaking itself gives you sustain to increase your damage by ditching a sustain altogether. This Anom is so cooked, you can apparently one-cost it with Gallagher and Dahlia. This is the new record. No other King Stage had a recorded 1-cost clear except this one, and it's not even a 4-star DPS, it's fucking Gallagher. There's also a clear with Himiko with a sustain. Of course, it's Gallagher. Outside the break, there's a 3-cost High Sealants and Mighty clear. There was a 7-cost Bootil clear, and again, 5 shared HP bars. Bootil could clear it, what the hell. And you also have the obligatory multiple off element 5-cost Evernight clears at 0 cycles. I personally used Jiao Cho as a main break DPS on stream and got through it. Yeah, this King Stage is just a punching bag. I genuinely think that this is a new type of survey that Hoyo wants to put out. Do you prefer the first Anomaly Arbitration, where the King is a really hard stage while the Knights are easier? Or do you prefer this Anomaly Arbitration, where the Knights are so hard that if you manage to even get through the Knights, the King is basically a freebie? Because that's genuinely what it is. If you're able to beat the Knights, your roster is guaranteed to be cracked enough to clear King. We can discuss that topic in more depth in a different video, but by definition, this balancing is actually better for the players since clearing King gives way more rewards. So I'm not against it, honestly. Comment if you'd like to see a video with that topic. I'm not really thinking too hard about this right now. Anyway, the King Stage is so easy that I can guarantee you can clear it if you can even get 6 stars on the Knights. Maybe even just the minimal 3 stars. It really is that easy. So yeah, that's all I guess. Surprisingly, King is so easy that it feels like a freebie, and the night stages are the real difficulty of the fight. And that's not because something worse than Hule showed up. If I compare this to other night stages in previous Anom arbitrations, there's been harder night stages than this one. In my opinion, the DOT stage from Anom 1 and the Hule stage on Anom 2 was more difficult than any singular one of these nights, but in those cases, Hule was paired with the undertuned Pure Fiction-esque night stage, and the DOT stage from Anom 1 was paired with a break stage that was undertuned because it was before Dahlia released. So in previous Anoms, you had a much harder singular night stage, but there was at least one night stage that was a freebie, while this one demands you have equal amounts of power in all 3 nights. And there's no like easy BSing through it, like using like a 3-cost Yunli team to clear. Even the easiest night stage for this Anom is still difficult for older meta DPS like Fei Xiao in comparison to previous cycles where even, you know, Yunli, Jade, Firefly before Dahlia, and Himiko were easier to clear despite being off meta. Again, just like Break, even if it's not the hardest, there's enough of them to stretch your roster and crumble. Does that make sense? Whatever. So overall, I like this Anon. At the end of the day, this is all optional content, and the night stages being hard is better from a player perspective because of the rewards, so at least there's that. Again, I don't feel bad that you can't clear this. If you want the dice, you can 1-star every night stage and you'll get to it, so there's actually less FOMO that way. Hope you guys like this yap video. I'm sorry if it sounded a bit disorganized, and yeah, I have a couple of ideas lined up, so let's see if I can get through them. Anyway, bye bye.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go